the next stage of the day, which is our wonderful panel talking about the convergence of art and science. So we're going to start out with a 3 to 5 minute introduction from our marine artist, Krisanne Baker, followed by a similar introduction from Bob Steneck. And then we'll sort of open up the floor to conversations, questions from y'all. We have a few questions to get started, but please don't hesitate to engage with the panel.
What really got me into science was my mother giving me a microscope when I was 6. She was working on her biology degree, and the science department was deacquisitioning microscopes because they got funding for some new ones. So she gave me one and showed me how to use it, and it just opened up a whole new world. I'd already been painting for a couple of years at that point, but seeing the microscopic and what things are made of and the patterns. The first thing I'll never forget, she showed me a little piece of onion skin, and I was just blown away by all the little shapes and patterns that all fit together with little dots in between them, and just delicious. Anyway, my art and science really took off, I'd say about 20 years ago. I was at the Haystack for a glass blowing scholarship, and there was this bioluminescence going on at night in this one little square cut cove. And I do not like to swim at night ever since Jaws came out when I was 13. But it was so hot and we were sweating bullets, and somebody said, "Let's go swimming." I was like, okay, safety in numbers, and we'll bite somebody else. So we went in, and it was like, Tinkerbell and Jacques Cousteau together. It was just crazy. And so I wanted to know more, and I'd just gotten my grad degree, and I was in research mode, so I started looking up all these scientific papers that I could. I was trying to contact scientists, but scientists aren't always, don't always have the time to be chatting with an artist who is not full of weird questions. I sought out some artists in residencies. This is from me working at Bigelow Laboratories for Ocean Sciences. I don't know if you ever saw the 25-foot high glass installation of mutating phytoplankton in 2019 till 2021. That was me. So ever since I found out that phytoplankton create more than 50% of the oxygen that we breathe, I just was so enamored of these things, and oh my gosh, everybody in the world needs to know about this stuff, and they need to know about how important the systems are and how we're all connected to it. So this is one painting, a detail. So some crab and some lobster larvae in there, and some other phytoplankton. And then this is one called Micro Macro, which is looking at phytoplankton from a NASA space photograph. So I do look at a lot of imagery from NOAA and NASA with their satellite imagery. I'm still in contact with Mike Lomas that I did that residency with. And I think that the ways that we can put together art just helps people with science, helps people to make sense of both. The glass piece here is some upcycled glass silhouettes of some whales. I did a Gulf of Maine Dare to Care curriculum with my high school kids, and they had to do research on their favorite pick. And then they had to do it in upcycled glass that we've used in the kiln, and they're installed in a hanging installation. And the kids told me that art finally made some sense to them, and they loved being able to make work that was meaningful. And some of them told me they're going on to become marine biologists, and one was going to be an environmental lawyer. I just love it. This is one of my pieces from the Bigelow installation. It has phosphorescent pigments in it because one of those little phytoplankton babies glow in the dark. yeah, that's a combination of installation shot and some of the glass pieces, and also looking through the microscope. I spent 8 weeks drawing live samples of phytoplankton before I made the sculptures, and just learning as much as I could about them and grilling Mike for questions. This is one that's in Carl and David Little's book, or Penobscot, which I'm so pleased to have in that book. And it was also at the New Bedford Whaling Museum for about 6 months. And I'm down at a show in Yale too. It's this one little green crab that kept showing up when I go snorkeling in this one spot. Some close-ups of looking at things through the microscope after a plankton tow at Shoals Marine Laboratory. And then just looking at various different types of algae, green, brown, and red, and some of the little critters that live in and amongst them. I love snorkeling and then just unfocusing my eyes and then just seeing what swims by really close to my mask, and there's just so much life there. I also study down in the Caribbean, and these are 2 cuttlefish that were doing some sort of really funky mating dance. I love observing relationships of what's happening underneath the water, and then showing people that there's a whole other life down there. This is in memoriam to my friend, the Tridacnid gigas. Gigas?
It is gigas with 3 species.
There were 3 of them in this lagoon where I was in Thailand just this winter. I was setting up a ceramic studio for in conjunction with the Coral Reef Restoration Program for coral gardeners. And I just fell in love with this one particular giant clam, and I painted it, and I'm glad that one didn't sell, because my sponsor called me 2 days after I got back to the States and said that the bleachings had happened, and unfortunately my giant clams weren't able to escape because they were stuck there. But yeah, I hope to go back and do some more work there, because I made a lot of good friends with all the creatures underwater. So that's a quick overview of my work. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. They've given me a very short leash, so I've got 5 minutes for 5,000 years. Okay. The focus on art and science is, this convergence is something we're thinking about, and I wanted to just talk about what I think of as some common grounds. First of all of us, artists, scientists, everybody else, we all see patterns and detect patterns in space and in time. Artists and scientists are charged with interpreting those patterns, and you've seen some of that, the killer clams that we just saw illustrated. Scientists often wonder why we see the phenomena. And so, what we see underwater is really different than everything that you see on land. And if I had an ulterior motive here, it's to give you a sense, a little flavor of the dynamics and the literal and figurative turbulence underwater that's underwater and out of sight. This is the world that I saw in the 1970s when I first came to the coast of Maine. This is what I saw when I first arrived. The question is, was this natural? What I saw were lobsters, crabs, sea urchins. I saw virtually no fish. And I just thought that is normal for here. But if I could ask the very first people setting up camp on the coast of Maine, what would be their experience? Well, we can't quite do that, but very close to here, you are here in that little bottom left-hand corner of Vinyl Haven. But just a few miles away is where the Turner Farm is on North Haven. And the Turner Farm is the very best studied archaeological site in the coast of Maine, one of the best in the western North Atlantic. Coming out of that, and I worked with a Maine state archaeologist on this, we find fish hooks carved out of deer bone that date almost 5,000 years ago. Cod vertebra, that's a centimeter scale. That vertebra is bigger than any vertebra in this room. What we know is there were cod. And what I was able to do, because it's actually all in the literature, is I looked at all the bone fragments that came up in the garbage heaps from the Turner farm, and found the following. Number one was cod, and these cod were big. By and large, the average size was about 1 meter in length. There were flounder. I can't get into it, but there was also the now extinct sea mink. But it's not just what you see, it's what you don't see. What we know is that these folks love seafood, but there were no lobsters or crabs anyway. And my interpretation of this is that if you think about the food web, and you think about what we might call an apex predator, let's say cod, it's big and it has a broad diet, it's a carnivore. And it keeps its prey relatively low in abundance. So that includes sea urchins, lobsters, and crabs. And if the sea urchin is the only herbivore we have in this marine system, and that's a fact, then in fact, if it's relatively rare, then we probably had a coast dominated by kelp, seaweed. But what we all know is that fishing capacity increased significantly in many ways. And in fact, if you look at, there were several periods of decline of cod, but I focused on the most recent one because really roughly in the mid-1980s is when we saw the bottom fall out, the extirpation of cod and other large predators in coastal Maine. If we look at lobsters, as an interesting story, it was really pretty flat from 1940 to about the mid-1980s, and that's about when I started studying them, and Rick Wally came as well, and we're not the reason for this, but the cod decline ushered in a whole new era of lobster abundance. And it went up, remarkable, $750 million of landed value. It's amazing. So what we can say is that we had an ecosystem. Both of those pictures were taken on Monhegan Island, by the way. The ecosystem has changed in favor of the lobster, and that is a significant ecological change, which is underwater and out of sight. But notice that we also see this decline, and this gets interesting. I have to say we really don't understand exactly why this decline is happening, except it's entirely possible that it's an indirect effect of climate change. It could have to do with the food that lobster larvae eat, but this is an area, when you see a pattern, it's worth a study, and that's a pattern that we need to study. And it gets us into this idea that humans have actually created food web dysfunction. And by overfishing, these apex predators, and carnivores are rare, their prey increase in abundance, lobsters, crabs, sea urchins. And the sea urchin, again, it's the only herbivore, and when it was highly abundant, this is what I saw when I first came to Maine, we had these areas called sea urchin barrens. And it was nothing short of amazing, these carpets of sea urchins that existed in some places. Sorry, this is a documentary, and I'm not supposed to be talking over myself. But so this did not go unnoticed among the marine community, and the sea urchin fishery began in 1987. It peaked in 1993, and it's a classic boom and a bust. So today, sea urchins are literally rare on the coast of Maine. We spent a couple of dives and couldn't find a single sea urchin. That was really too bad. The changes that have gone on are amazing. This is footage that I took at Penobscot Point in 1993, and that's sea urchins and corallines. And the sea urchin industry came in, took the sea urchins out, and within 2 years, this is 1995, it was a kelp forest. There's nothing like that on land, right? I mean, can you imagine a forest showing up in 2 years? So what we're looking at is really the loss of these big predators and the loss of the herbivores, and now we have an abundance of seaweeds. But over time, it hasn't stopped right there. And what we're seeing now along the coast is this increasing number of not the kelp are declining, and this little filamentous algae is growing. It's creating a carpet. It's an entirely different story, and I think this is again an indirect effect of climate change. So really, I think that to sum this up, Penobscot Bay and the Gulf of Maine marine ecosystem is dynamic, and it's largely invisible to most of us. And this is where I think, can art help? It would be great to bring some of this to light. Accelerating change requires greater agility in navigating these wildly shifting currents that we're seeing. I mean, look at the number of changes that I've described in my lifetime. I never would have expected that. And with change, there are also new opportunities to preserve our marine heritage, and we need art, science to better understand our brave new ocean. And with that, I thank you.
Wonderful.
5,000 years, 5 minutes.
Yeah, so we're now going to just open it up to questions from the audience. So feel free.
My question is, what with the farming that's happening of harvesting seaweeds and algae, what do they anticipate will happen once if that was over harvested? So.
Right, and of all the things I've talked about, probably the group that can regenerate the fastest will be the seaweeds. Kelp grows remarkably fast, and there are a lot of there's a lot of exploration about what to do with the kelp. In terms of animal feed, in terms of fertilizer, there's certainly food products that you can have directly. Some of that is actually wild harvested, and some of it is actually putting out strings, and it grows really rapidly. I think that of the things I've described, it's probably one of the more sustainable resources to harvest. Personally, my concern is whether they'll saturate the market. You always have to be thinking about business plans. But among the things that I think are going to maintain the maritime heritage, aquaculture in a variety of forms is one of them. Of course, we know there's salmon aquaculture. There's a lot of experimentation going on here on scallop aquaculture, and they're growing algae for a variety of purposes. So, I think it's a matter of keeping our eye on not over-harvesting and trying to maintain our maritime heritage, because I would not like to see the coast of Maine just become a theme park.
Thank you, Bob. We have other question in the back?
Yeah, would kelp be a carbon sink? Like, how would that affect for climate change?
Right, a lot of people have explored that. The problem we have in the Gulf of Maine is that to be it sucks up a lot of carbon. But until you can get it down to about 1,000 meters depth, you need to sequester the carbon. And without that, there's so much biological activity that critters come and they eat it, they respire, it goes right back to the atmosphere. So if you're basically not able to sequester it, the sequestration period has to be measured in centuries. And the Gulf of Maine, the deepest spots are about 800 feet. Wilkinson Basin, Jordan Basin, moderately deep, but you'd have to get off of George's Bank to get to that kind of depth. That's 250 miles offshore. So this is not a great place for that. Monterey Bay, different story. And so there are places where they are doing that. But and I think there was a lot of interest in the fact that kelp sucks up carbon rapidly, but they weren't thinking about sequestration.
Krisanne, could you say something about those coral gardeners that you worked with?
The coral gardeners were started about 7 or 8 years ago by a fellow who was native to French Polynesia Morea. His dad was a pearl farmer and he was a surfer. And he noticed that some of the corals were bleaching and were looking horrible, but nobody was doing anything about it or talking about it. And so he just took his passion and ran with it, got other friends to start working with him, and has gotten corporate sponsors, and he's a National Geographic fellow.
Is he growing the corals? Is that what he's doing?
So what they did was they took they upcycled the ropes from the pearl farming.
Yep.
And they untwisted them and they put a fragment in between, and then they strung the ropes in between in nurseries so that they were just out, and that worked really, really well for them. They've also experimented with the trees, like a lot of other places, so several different types of nurseries to see what species they can, what are the super species that can withstand the warmer temperatures, and those are the ones that they're growing and then outplanting. And I had an opportunity to work with the new coral gardener site on a little tiny island in Thailand. And we were doing the same thing. They were setting up the nurseries when I was first there, and I was developing the art program that everything that we did was all about coral. And my partner and I were out snorkeling every day. That was our morning research. It was a great way to research. Seeing what's going on in the lagoon with the corals, and as the temperatures started rising, we started seeing them losing their color, and eventually, just before we left, there was a massive bleaching. It was, I guess, it's the 4th global bleaching that's happened this year, and it's not happened everywhere, but in places where it's warmed up so far, it has. So they're just working on trying to keep the species alive, moving them to some deeper areas, and seeing which ones can withstand the best temperatures, and really trying to reproduce those and keep them going. It's a great outfit, full of passionate people.
Was that, tell me again where you were?
I was on a little island called Komak in Thailand. So coral gardeners started in French Polynesia Morea. They just opened their second site in Fiji. And that was 2 years in the making, and the site where I was at was in its first year, was in its infancy, and they'll have probably another year of getting established before they announce that to the world.
This also was for Krisanne. I was just curious, art is often very inspiring and can evoke emotion. I'm kind of curious, do you get sort of common themes about feedback, like in terms from the work that you create? Like people tend to say that your work can make them feel a certain way, and I guess how does that align with the way you feel about your own work?
Well, it's always a mix of emotions that brings an artist to do what they do. I mean, climate change is something that really eats away at me, but at the same time, you can get depressed about it, or you can try to do something about it. And so that is what I'm trying to do with my work. I'm trying to use beauty, what's left in the world, because there's still so much left to save, to highlight that, show people what's going on underwater, and show people our connection to the ocean, because if we don't have a healthy ocean, there's not going to be any us. I just feel I don't know what different emotions people have when they look at my work. Some people have written comments, and when I've had exhibitions that oh, this is so sad, or oh, this is so beautiful, I want to see more, or I want to know more, I want to do something. So it's all mixed. You just never know what you're gonna get. Just hope that it's inspirational in some way.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Rick?
Yeah, so I wanted to get back to this convergence idea a bit more, and I had a really great lunch this afternoon with some artists. I was the only scientist in the mix. We had painters, photographers, and so forth. And you heard Bob tell his story. So much is about telling the story, and to me, that's what a lot of art is about too, I think, telling the compelling story. But what was really interesting about this lunch was, how you interpret your observation, or the patterns you make, and what you decide to emphasize or not. The painter said, well, I've got a nice landscape, but I can easily edit out that telephone pole, or the photographer could use Photoshop and do some interesting manipulations with the image. And even scientists will, choose to emphasize some facts and not others. They bring their personal bias. I have my own interpretation of some of Bob's things, but that's a separate story. But and the unscrupulous unscrupulous scientist or observer might choose to eliminate certain inconvenient truths. But there's sort of a convergence here in how you observe patterns and what are our takeaways from that. I think it's really interesting how we interpret the world in different ways, and I'm not sure what my concluding message here is, but it was just really interesting to hear some of those observations.
I think that there are so many similarities between the arts and the sciences. I know every artist who works from nature spends an infinite amount of time looking, and just looking, not even making the art, just looking and studying and watching the way light hits something and the patterns that are, like those onion cells that I talked about when I was a little kid. And the way a scientist has to look at something for a really long time, over time, to see the changes. It's totally time-based, it's totally pattern-based. I think if you're not slow enough, that you miss a lot. And I think that that's something that we probably have in common, is that really being very careful observation.
I always think that studying the patterns is absolutely always the first step. And you might see patterns in space or in time, and then you start, as an ecologist, you start thinking about what some of the ecological processes are, whether it's reproduction or how the babies get started, or if they compete with one another, or if there's predators out there. And if you start understanding your system well enough, then you can start designing experiments that can tease out some of these issues. And then, you can reject some that was a bad idea. And you start seeing, it's one of these things where scientists always say, well, you can't prove a hypothesis, but if you fail to disprove it, that's supposed to be pretty good. That's sort of how we go through life. I mean, I was very interested in size distribution of lobsters and watching lobsters in shelters and how they compete with one another. So we had these PVC pipes out that we could change the spacing so that they would be in higher densities, and we started seeing more competition. And much to our surprise, the bigger lobsters were leaving those competitive arrays. I think it was they can't turn off their competitive juices, and so they were diffusing to areas of lower population density. And this started helping us understand size frequency distributions from inshore to offshore. So these experiments, and that may not be the final answer, but I was able to publish it and wait for somebody to say, well, where he got it wrong was the following. So that's the way the scientific process works, as though, we may see things differently, we can test them, we can come up with better experiments, but it all starts, as you said, with the patterns.
So Krisanne, I've enjoyed watching your art over the years that I've seen it. And picking up on that question, of course, about sort of beauty and wonder, we live in this Anthropocene where we orient ourselves to, human beings. We're separate from nature. And I think art has a role in helping us shift to another conception, another whole frame of us being part of nature. And I think a lot of indigenous art does that. They just communicate that we're not separate, we're a part. We honor these things. And so I wonder if maybe indigenous art has any interest, or whether there's sort of an intention in your art to sort of communicate this interrelated shared life that you have.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. I have always been interested in stewardship and stewardship of the land and the ocean. And the indigenous methods are just near and dear to my heart, because they take care of the land not expecting it to always be giving. It's more giving back and being grateful and thankful for it. And so I love that way of looking at the planet and living on the planet. And so with the work that I do, that's one of the reasons that I try to inspire stewardship, is so that people will develop that kind of relationship with the planet, whether it's, a tree or the ocean or something, just to start with.
I have a question, because we're talking about creativity in art, and it appears to be visual art. Am I wrong? Mostly, I would like to suggest that one of the studios of art is in the other room next door. Culinary art is as important and possibly a solution to some of the problems that we are dealing with right now. And I bring this up only because there was something on the radio in the last week or so, and they had a bunch of chefs talking about the things that you can do, and they are doing in restaurants, I think more in the Portland area, with green crabs. Now, if that caught on, it might solve the problem, because all of a sudden we'd be harvesting them as fast as we possibly could, because it's an economic incentive. But culinary art should not be, I think, should be part of the big picture, and it probably is not something most of us are thinking about.
What you will see during our next cocktail and food hour will be some fresh scallop dishes from scallops that were grown here on the aquaculture farm at Hurricane Island. That's this morning. Yes. So before we transition, I think we may have time for one more question, or you can allow your stomachs to make the decision for you. Oh, I think one more in the back.
So I'm an artist and very inspired by science and this location over my life. My big frustration is we're all patiently converted here. Most people know this information or accept it. And art is a way to then transfer that information off to the masses. But what do you do when the masses are looking at a phone or think that art belongs to somebody else and I haven't been trained to it? And yes, there are many other arts besides the fine arts or to go through culinary arts or dance or music or something. But the real trick is how do we get this message that we are all interconnected to all the people who are being taught that facts are stupid things, who want to not believe some science, and yet their lives depend on it in another world. And so my question is to everybody here, how do we get the message to the people who don't want science, who don't think their life is artistic, who can't comprehend what's happening next week, let alone 1,000 years in the future, or what happened 50 years ago here? It's how do we get that message across?
I just want to comment on that very quickly, to say that one of the goals of Hurricane Island is to do education, teach leadership, and these are all experience-based education opportunities, and the hope is that next generation of leaders are going to be coming from Hurricane Island and spreading the word. And one of the things that I'm very interested to see us develop is better ways to tell stories, to improve our narrative, and start connecting. And what I have to say, as a scientist, what I see way too often is scientists coming up, throwing a ton of data at a bunch of people and say, don't you see the pattern that I see? And they completely fail the narrative. And we're going to have to do a better job of that, and you have to have some experience, and I think that's a big part of what happens here on the island.
Key to what you said is experiential education, and that's something that I strive for, putting up exhibit up after exhibit of my artwork. Even if it doesn't always sell, I just keep putting it up because I will give a talk and I'll have an audience and I'll be able to, talk with people and have questions and answers. And it depends on where you have those exhibits. And the kind of people you have access to. And this fall, on November 1st, one other friend of mine, two friends of mine, Liz Cunningham, ocean writer, and Julie Crane, another marine artist, the three of us are teaming up to do a show at Rockport Public Library called Plankton in Our Midst, because we're all about the plankton. And who knows about plankton? But we're making a very experiential Kids Day, where we'll have a workshop and we'll have the microscopes set up, and they're going to be decorating cookies that we make in the shapes of some of the plankton, and all sorts of fun stuff. So, catching kids young, and definitely through education.
Thank you, our wonderful panel.